And we're live. And I need to turn my camera on.
Yeah, that would help.
It would. I need to listen to the Aquilo episode.
Yes, you do.
Episode 2 was real good, though. I will say that.
The third one, it's like, oh, okay, things are moving now.
It took me a little bit in episode 2 to figure out exactly what was going on. I had an idea, but I wasn't 100% sure. And then all of a sudden, I was like, oh, no.
Mm-hmm.
Killing it as always, those two.
Yeah.
Pardon me. All right, close this. We've got our recording.
And I did watch the documentary, so.
Cool. All right, well, I think we just do the thing.
Sounds good.
So we'll do the intro and just roll right into it. I don't think there's no point in having the gaps because we're not going to have like clips. There's no episode to pull from. So we'll just do the intro, roll right into talking about the season, kind of go over just what we liked, what we didn't, what worked and whatnot.
Mm-hmm.
And then we'll wrap everything up. So this might be a little bit shorter, might not. I don't know. We'll just kind of see how it goes.
Yeah. We'll see how we take it.
Yeah. All right. And recording will start in 2, 1. Here we go. And welcome into Let's Watch Highlander. This is Let's Watch Highlander, The Raven, the wrap-up special. And here to talk with you, as we always are, I'm Travis, a.k.a. TV's Travis. That is the Audie Norman. Audie, how are you?
Doing all right, man. A little bittersweet tonight doing this one.
It is. It's the end of the series. We have watched all of Highlander the Raven and subsequently watched all of the Highlander content we can.
Yeah. Well, we could have watched a little bit more of the Saturday morning cartoon, but we really didn't need to.
Yeah, we could have, but we're not doing that.
No.
So,
fine.
Yeah. So Highlander the Raven, 22 episodes, lasted one season, spinning off from Highlander the series. Overall, what did you think of it as a series? Kind of, I don't know if I want to do like a letter grade or sort of a 1 to 10 scale, but like, just what did you think of it kind of overall?
Yeah, this is one of those things where like, it's super interesting if you are a fan of Highlander the series. If you are not a fan of Highlander the series at all, I cannot recommend this to you at all. It is not something that's going to be worth your time. If you're a fan of Highlander the series, if you followed that series and know who Amanda is, yeah, you can watch this and probably enjoy it as much as we did. It's such a weird thing because it's a spin-off of another series. And it just didn't quite work as well. And and especially that last episode that just didn't quite stick the landing. It just felt like a wet fart at the end of what was potentially, as we have talked over these episodes, the last half of the season got better and they started finding their footing of being more of a Highlander kind of show.
Yeah.
But it just wasn't enough to pull it all the way through.
No, it's unfortunate because the series had potential. Now, season 6 of the Highlander series was half trying to figure out what they're going to do for this spinoff. Like they decided they wanted to do that spinoff at that point. We already talked that to death, and it was mixed reviews on that. And of course, none of it stuck. So they go with Amanda, and I think Amanda is a great character to try and follow.
Sure.
And sort of setting it in a random city. They don't ever say what city we were originally in. I think it was supposed to maybe be New York.
I think they more or less referenced it as New York at one point, but they weren't on the nose with it at all.
Which is fine. And then it was funny how they did the mid-season move to Paris, though. That kind of cracked me up. But I'm with you. It's kind of missed potential. And they really kind of put themselves behind the eight ball right away by just it wasn't a great start to the series.
Yeah.
And so then they're playing catch up the whole time, and it really took until the move to Paris in the second half of the season before it kind of found its legs. Before that, they just didn't quite know what they wanted to do. And
Yeah.
you
It's
know, it was one of those things where Amanda was fine, Paul Johansson was fine, but their chemistry was so bad and non-existent to
yeah.
start that didn't help them at all. I'm sorry,
And
I
at
cut
this
you off.
point, I no, it's fine. It's just I got to say, okay, you sent me a documentary that's basically the behind the scenes how it got made.
Right.
You know what led to Highlander the Raven. It's got most of the producers. It's got Elizabeth Grayson, Paul Johansson giving their perspectives and everything. Um, I had no idea anywhere close to what the crap was going on behind the scenes. You don't have to go watch it if you don't want to. We can share it with you if you do want to watch it. It's interesting to see the decisions they made.
Mm-hmm.
And we'll probably talk about that some here because I feel like we need to bring that up to
Yeah.
kind of, fill that in. Basically, Elizabeth Grayson had some issues, um, and then was with a terrible person. And in the age of man or bear, it's like no wonder women keep choosing bear
Right.
when they find these types of men. She was basically just mentally and emotionally captured by this person who just totally, totally wrecked her mind at the time they were making this series.
Mm-hmm.
And so that just destroyed her potential to have any real chemistry with anybody. Like the producers that knew her before from Highlander the series were like, this is different. Paul Johansson never could get close to her.
Mm-hmm.
I felt so bad for him, feeling like he got such a raw deal out of this. And a lot of the producers acknowledged that yeah, some of the promises we made to him at the beginning were not fulfilled just the way the series went. So it was just there's a lot of stuff that were working against them in this series, but they still made it
Yeah.
and made it happen. And the fact that it's any kind of quality that it is speaks to the people that made it, and even Elizabeth Grayson and Paul Johansson and their abilities on camera.
Yeah.
Period.
Yeah. The fact that this made it to air at all is pretty impressive. And
Mm-hmm.
the things we have had to say negative about this particular series have nothing to do with the people making it and like effort going into it. It was just a lack of it was direction and choices that got made that didn't pan out, and then all this stuff going on behind the
Mm-hmm.
scenes you find out about. So
Yeah.
there was a lot working against it because the stuff that worked, like everything with Father Liam,
Yes.
and um, it's already tricky, right? Because one of the things that made Highlander work well is Duncan, and then it was about Duncan's relationships. And
Right.
when we first meet him, he's in a committed relationship with Tessa.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's the solid relationship, but Tessa knows about his immortality, is on board with it. And then we get Richie who learns about it, and now he's the outsider that doesn't know about it, that's learning as we do.
Mm-hmm.
And they make the move to kill off Tessa and move in a different direction because behind the scenes
Which
stuff was part of that.
which I learned only recently reading behind the scenes. Basically, oh, what's her name that played Tessa?
Alexandra
Um,
Vandernoot.
yeah, she basically just wanted to be home with family. Like she
Mm-hmm.
was shooting in Canada, away from family,
Yeah.
and it just was not working for her mentally. So she was like, "I want off." They were like, "Okay, yeah, that's fine. We'll write you off." She came back for a couple episodes, and it was fine. And it sucks because it was a great character, and it was like we said many times, it was impressive that a relationship worked on a show even like this.
It
So
is. I will say, though, I think the show, while losing Tessa as a character was a huge bummer for obvious reasons because her connection with Duncan was so strong and that relationship was great.
mhm,
It did help the show in the long run because
sure,
it gave Duncan's story somewhere to go.
right, it gave
With
his character freedom to be more than just in this relationship person, which
yeah,
again worked. works well. Like again, impressively written relationship,
Hmm.
but still having this kind of character be more free from that kind of thing works better in the long run.
And I think also when your main character is immortal and their significant other is mortal, at some point you're going to cross that bridge. Whether
Right.
whether it's the way that they went about it further along in the series before they do that as stakes,
Mm-hmm.
or the eventual knowing that she's going to grow old and he isn't,
Right.
that kind of thing. So there's a little bit of that
Mm-hmm.
going on. And I think one of the problems with the Raven was, number one, Amanda isn't the type to settle down. So to have this will they, won't
Right.
they with her is tough, because we know Amanda as fans. And it's like, well, I can't really see her ever making that commitment and like staying with one person long term. Like her and
Yeah.
Duncan's relationship even is much more of kind of it's a closer friends with benefits sort of relationship, but they understood that,
Mm-hmm.
like it's a love between the two of them,
Right.
that they understand how it works.
Right. Because they
So
understood each other as
yeah,
characters.
and again, Paul Johansson, it's not a knock on him. He, I think, got
No,
stronger throughout the series in playing
absolutely.
Nick Wolf, but I think that there were some choices made with the character of Nick Wolf that I didn't love. Not just the turning him into an immortal at the end of the season, which I don't agree with. And certainly if you were going to do that, end of season 1 is not when you do that, but I wouldn't have done it at all.
Right. Yeah.
But there were other parts to his character that were inconsistent. Um,
Mm-hmm.
him being the Boy Scout, follow the letter of the law, but then another episode he'll be all about revenge. And it's like those two
Right.
things don't typically go together very well. So,
Yeah.
it's
I
just
mean, there's ways you could do it, but they just didn't do it well in this series at all.
yeah. And then Bert as a character, as a side character, was initially very clunky.
Mm-hmm.
He got better, but it was a rough go because it felt like there were a few episodes there where they were really trying to force Bert as a main character, and then eventually just gave up on him, and he just wasn't there anymore.
Yeah, well, they took one episode to focus on him, and it was just totally. He felt like a different character than the Bert we were introduced with,
Mm-hmm.
and then was different from the Bert we got reintroduced with later, who was more of the Bert that we knew and really came to appreciate as not a main character, but a good side character
Yeah,
involved in all this.
yeah. I mean, Father Liam, great side character. I think
Oh,
Lucy
yeah.
was a good side character as Amanda's friend, and then she just sort of disappears after 9
Yeah.
episodes and
You
never
know,
mentioned again.
that was one of the things they were talking about that documentary about the choice to make Lucy an older person who knew Amanda through history because of,
Hmm.
their shared history really ended up not being the choice they should have made. Like they were talking about they were thinking of somebody younger, more contemporary to where Amanda, physically looks like she should be,
Hmm.
and have somebody younger and quote unquote hip for her to be involved with. Like one of them was like, one of the producers was like, I wanted Carrie Ann Moss to be that person. Like Carrie Ann Moss could have done that and would have done that if I had my way, but we didn't go there. But just the fact that they made Lucy be an older person, and then Amanda's apartment in that first half of the series is so much of a older person's apartment and not didn't feel as much like you would think Amanda's apartment would really be.
Yeah, there's a little. I The thing with Lucy that didn't bother me was she reminded me a bit of the character from the first movie. Um, Hang on, because I will figure out uh,
Yeah, Connor's assistant that was the girl he found.
the one he found in World War II,
Right.
and he
Yeah.
rescues her and then raises her.
Sure.
Like that's who Lucy
Mm-hmm.
reminded me of, and I think that is a
Yeah.
character and a character type that could work, right? Because you've got this older
Sure.
character who's known Amanda for all this time and Amanda's watched her grow up, grow old, This woman has been around and seen Amanda through all of this, understands the world. But they didn't give Lucy never got like the Lucy. We got one Lucy episode, and it was right before she exited the show. She wasn't really around much anymore after that, and so that's always tough, right? When it would have been like making a Charlie DeSalvo focused episode, and then 2 episodes later is when he leaves and goes off to be in the Peace Corps or whatever it was he ended up doing.
Sure.
That was just strange choice to make. It just felt like every time they would make a decision and go in a direction, then they would make another decision that would either contradict that or somehow go back against whatever it was that they were doing.
Yeah. Especially the first half of the season, there was just a lot of spaghetti thrown at the wall trying to see if it would stick.
Yeah, and that's
it was
tough
spaghetti,
to do.
so it wasn't sticking at all. So
no. I mean, if you look at season 6 of Highlander as a template, that's a bad template to follow, which is basically what they did. They followed that template,
pretty much.
It just doesn't work.
And I still come back to the whole premise of the naming of the show is the Raven, and that whole nomenclature and lore that was just barely touched on to get us the title and to get us introduced in the first episode, and then never touched again, except for the title sequence every time they mention it. But nothing about that actually takes place. If they had even tried to go in that direction and make this focused on that lore, I think it would have been okay, especially in the Highlander universe where we have had very more mystical, magical things happen here and there. If we had this spinoff kind of focus on that and maybe see how that fits into the Highlander universe. Okay, we've seen bits and pieces in Highlander the series. What if we have a series focusing on that kind of person? And focusing on Amanda taking up this mantle of the Raven, and then Nick being that quote unquote warrior. Reminds me a lot, when I think about it, there was what was it? There was a show about a guy who went to South America and was like, I forget what it was. Something awakened in him. He had supernatural powers, and that was the whole premise of the show. I can't remember. Oh, it's gonna drive me nuts thinking about it now.
Yeah, I know what you're talking about. Like, I can picture it, but I cannot put a name to it.
The Sentinel. I think that was it.
I think you're right. I'm gonna look that up while you keep going.
Yeah, but like the whole idea of that is like there are people throughout history who are the sentinel for their tribe or whatever, and somehow this modern day guy gets those quote unquote powers awakened in him and is kind of a superhero kind of thing. I feel like that's what the whole premise of the Raven could have been, but they just didn't bother with that at all.
Yeah, it talked a lot about how we never skipped the opening because Princess of the Universe is such a great song, and the opening for Highlander was just one you watched every time. And I would skip the opening to this series every opportunity I had because it just didn't have it. It didn't have the song, number one, which that's no fault of theirs. You're not going to have another Queen. Although it's funny because if they could have gone like the CSI route, right, and just used a different Queen song for the next series. Because if you remember, all the different CSI shows would all have different Who songs.
Would have been funny to have Who music.
Yeah, but also like I'm with you. They bring up this lore, the whole, the Raven stole the sun and the moon and they sent a warrior and all this. None of that has anything to do with anything that goes on in the series ever at any point. And it just felt like somebody was like, well, we need something that's different from just talking about her like we talked about Duncan. But the series is about Duncan. So if this series is about Amanda and Nick, then talk about them in the open or lean into that that mythology and go in that direction.
Right. Or if it's not mythology, just something about her being the Raven. Have the whole season be about something to do with the Raven. It's an alias she has, or it's somebody they're chasing throughout the series, or something.
Well, and
There's
that
just
was
nothing that ties us to the Raven.
yeah, because we've had nothing with Amanda to tie the Raven to her previously. So either
Right.
create that and flesh out her backstory and give us that, or because the Raven came
Mm-hmm.
from, it was the first of the backdoor pilot attempts in season 6.
Mm-hmm.
That character was called the Raven. I can't remember her name now. I'd have to look that up because I just most of those episodes I remember them happening, but I don't remember like names of any of the side characters in them.
Right. Yeah.
But it was absolutely came from that, and
Mm-hmm.
it was just that felt. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but that felt like somebody was like Highlander the Raven would make a great title. It's like cool, we'll just go with that instead of actually
Yeah.
trying to work that in a way that makes sense.
Yeah, pretty much. And especially, when you think of a Raven, you don't think of white hair like Amanda had all through the season, which was
Right.
fine. But it's just, one more thing where it's just like we don't have the connection here we should.
No, not at all. And it was Alex Raven from,
Oh, that's what it was.
and that was basically where that came from. So, yeah, they needed to lean into that a little bit more, which I think would have helped it. I think ultimately what it felt like is either they had a plan and then had to abandon it, or they just didn't have enough of a plan of what they wanted to do. So we spent too much time trying to figure that out, which gave us
Mm-hmm.
half-baked versions of Bert and Lucy, Carl Magnus. The whole angle with
Yeah.
Nick being a cop. He should have stayed. Like, I would have kept him as a cop longer than the first episode, right? Because he basically quits at the end of at the beginning of the second episode. He should have probably stayed on the force longer to try and figure out, what was going on and all of that. And then it makes him still connecting with Carl make more sense. Because he spent those first 10 episodes trying to be a cop anyway.
I was going to say, it was basically a cop show anyways, so why not have him be the cop while he's doing this cop show?
Yeah.
I think focusing on Amanda.
Yeah. Which, again, could have been interesting, right? If you keep that up and keep that going and have her doing some more thievery stuff, like she's getting back into that and he's working on trying to catch her. Anything. There's a lot of different ways you could go about that.
Right.
I also think the series was hurt by a lack of... I mean, there were other immortals on occasion for most of the episodes, but the Watchers were pretty much a non-entity, except for the 2-part episode, really. We got one other one, right? I think there was one other episode that had a Watcher in it, one or two.
Yeah.
But they...
Yeah, because the Watchers weren't much of a thing in this at all.
No, and after spending, 5 seasons with them and them being such an integral part of Highlander and the lore of Highlander, and then to basically just ignore them. I mean, we got 2 episodes with Joe Dawson, awesome, but that was the extent of the Watchers. There should have been more of that going on. And maybe you have something where Nick starts figuring out stuff with Immortals while he's still in the police force, and there's a Watcher working in the precinct. And there could have been a thing like...
That would have been interesting if Nick was actually recruited into the Watchers because of what he learned and knew, and that became Amanda's actual Watcher.
See, that
and
is
then
more...
you've got Nick with Amanda the way Joe was with Duncan.
Yeah, and that's a lot more interesting than turning Nick into an immortal at the end of the season. That's how they should have ended the season. The end of the season should have culminated in him getting recruited into the Watchers.
Yeah.
Because how great would that have been?
That would have
been. Your side characters, your Bert and Bert, Carl, those types of characters could all have been Watchers. And maybe we don't get the reveal of it until later on. Not necessarily the exact characters they were, but like what runtime we spent with them could have gone that route.
But Nick being introduced to the Watchers, have it, have Joe actually recruit him, and then have the end of that be like, we're supposed to watch and record, but never interfere. And Nick's like, I don't know if I could do that. And Joe's like, well, it's a new day. The Watchers have changed, over the centuries. Maybe it's time for another one, kind of thing. Like after Joe's time with Duncan, recruiting Nick and his time with Amanda could be a whole different thing that they could do with the Watchers.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah. No, that would have been great. And, you know, there's that. Then also him meeting Liam, and that could make for a really interesting pairing with Nick and Liam, because that was one of the strong suits of the season, was
Absolutely.
Liam himself, but Nick and Liam especially, the two of them. There was chemistry between those two and those two characters.
There absolutely was. And the conversations that they had between Nick and Liam were some of the most interesting Highlander / Immortal conversations we've had in this series and all of Highlander the series.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And imagine then if he's not only learning about the world of Immortals, but then he starts learning about the world of Watchers, and maybe he doesn't tell Liam about that yet because he's not sure.
Right.
So we've got that angle going on. So like it gets more interesting with Nick. Here he is as a cop still, and he's trying to figure out, maybe at first his driving force is to find who it was, catch the person that killed his partner.
Right.
But then he learns about the Watchers, and so he's juggling with the police force, with the Watchers, with the Immortals. Then he eventually meets Father Liam. Like there's all sorts of really interesting things you could do there.
Or he could just become, internal affairs for the Watchers Society. Like, that's why Joe recruits him. It's like, we need the Watchers have been screwing up like crazy. We've gone through some stuff. We need to come back to being who we need to be.
Yeah.
And I need some enforcers from the outside.
Yep. That could work.
And recruits Nick for that.
I think also there was a missed opportunity with a character like Basil for him to be in 2 episodes and vastly underused. Because again, Liam is great because we like those immortal characters that aren't enemies. And that's another thing that this series was missing from what the Highlander series had. Highlander had lots of evil immortal of the week, right? But we also got a lot of Duncan's friends or Duncan's frenemies or whatever it was. It wasn't always just an antagonist for Duncan that he would run into. And Amanda didn't really have that.
Not much.
There was a couple, but there weren't that many. It was Liam.
Yeah.
I can think of 1 or 2 others, but for the most part, if there was another immortal.
Yeah. I mean, Lucy kind of filled that only because she was older and had knew Amanda in the past. And then there was the other girl who was like the competing thief with Amanda.
Right.
And they teamed up at the end of that episode. But that was about it.
Yeah. I mean, outside of that, the only other immortal characters we get were all people that she met in the past and had bad relationships with. There was the Lucy focused episode, I think, had somebody we liked, if I remember right. But like for the most part, Basil would have been an interesting one to have pop up every so often. Be like that one, and then a Watcher. There's all these different things that they could have done, and they just didn't. And that's one of the big ones, I think, is not enough immortal characters that aren't antagonists for us to bounce off of.
Right.
So, I mean, it is what it is. It was a one season thing. It's possible they could have sorted a lot of that stuff out, but I think 1998, we're getting to the point where shows aren't getting 2 seasons to find their feet anymore.
Right.
Because let's be real. Highlander itself, its first season, is a little bit rough around the edges.
Yeah.
But it had a strong opening and overall much stronger, which is why it got picked up and continued.
Right.
But it easily could have only lasted one season. Thankfully, it was the strength of Adrian Paul, Alexander Vandernoot, Stan Kirsch,
Yeah.
and ending it on a high note that helped that season continue on. And this one just stumbled right out of the gate and then just couldn't find its footing. And once it finally did, it limped into the finish line and then fell over. And
Right.
it's unfortunate.
Yeah.
And again,
It's
I
very
mean,
unfortunate.
behind the scenes stuff is a big part of that. And that's stuff that we
It
wouldn't
is.
know at the time.
Right. And again, in that documentary, Elizabeth Grayson was very forthwith, like, yeah, I screwed this up. I wish things were different. Paul Johansson's like, I wish we could have sat down and had an honest to God conversation as equals,
Yeah.
without all the crap in her head.
It would have made a huge difference. And it's it's very telling of who Elizabeth Grayson is as a person that she can't admit to that
Hmm.
and be like, look, I messed
And
this
Paul
all up.
Johansson, like, the how highly he spoke of everything after everything, after the criticisms and the, I kind of got a raw deal, like hearing him speak so highly of this series and what he went through and learned and did through it. I was like, I have so much respect and love for this dude as a person, as an actor,
Yeah.
and just wanted so much more for him from this series now after seeing and hearing that.
What I'm really glad about is that his career didn't peter out because of this. He's
Oh yeah.
he's gone. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, he's still working today. He's got 84
Yep.
credits, 5 upcoming acting credits. Like he kept getting work, and
Mm-hmm.
he didn't let this get to him, and it didn't wreck his career. Like, is he a star? No, but not everybody's going to be. But he's solid. He's working, and he
Mm-hmm.
got better. I've seen him in stuff
Yeah.
since this, and he has improved and gotten better too. So he took the right lessons from this, and I mean I'll be honest, like he's got a good look, and he had some
Mm-hmm.
acting ability for sure.
Yeah.
Like it wasn't an acting problem. It was just
No.
because of what was going on, the chemistry just never got there, and that is the
Right.
biggest thing that hurt this series is
Yeah.
a will they won't they with two characters, and you can tell they just don't want to be around each other, and that is not it's just
Right.
not going to work. So
Right. And yet there were still so many times where we're like, we can see chemistry there. Like it's there. Like
mm-hmm.
there is something
Oh,
potentially there, and they just could not work it out
mm-hmm.
because of these off-camera reasons. And it's so sad that they couldn't.
Yeah,
So,
but some work, some don't. It kind of doesn't help that this series didn't do well, didn't make it past one season,
mhm.
and then right after that is Highlander Endgame, which also has its faults and didn't do as well as they would have liked,
Right.
which led to the next movie taking several years to get made, followed by being direct to Sci-Fi Channel. So
Right.
it's sort of diminishing returns, and the anime
Mhm.
comes out, but nobody really saw that, unfortunately.
Right.
Um,
Yeah.
so I'm really hopeful for this new movie project to hit the ground running, to get going. I mean, I'm
Yeah.
hearing positive things. I'm hearing the right things from the people
Mhm.
involved.
Right.
I'm staying cautiously optimistic because as a Highlander fan, I've been hearing about this remake basically since the source came out. They've been talking
Yeah.
about
I
something.
mean, they've they've always wanted to do something, but in the last few years, when you get what is it, Chad Stahelski? Is that his
Yep.
name?
Stahelski, yep.
Stahelski getting on board saying, "I want to make this dang movie," and everybody like, "You want to make a Highlander? Sure!" Like all us fans are like, "Do it!" And then it actually apparently happening, and he's got all kinds of other commitments because he's making cool movies since John Wick,
Yep.
and has to work on that stuff and prioritize what he's working on. But now with him, with Henry Cavill apparently very much involved and apparently learning some sword fighting techniques and telling us it's cool and ready to get to it. He's like, The Witcher was cool. You ain't seen nothing yet. And it's like, okay, you've got my interest peaked.
And also it's one of those things where this is a really interesting world that you can explore, and so differently
Mm-hmm.
from 30 years ago, 35, almost
Yeah.
40. The franchise is almost 40 years old, and the changes in the world between 1986 and now are night and day. There's so much different now. There's so much more information. And the
Right.
idea of immortals living amongst the rest of us in modern day, to me, is fascinating. And there's a lot
Mm-hmm.
of places you can go with that. And because
Right.
it's immortals and it's Highlander, you're always going to have your flashbacks and things in your period piece sections to it. So
Yeah.
there's a lot to mine there if it's handled right. And I think that was
And
one of the biggest problems we had with the source, was just the setting in general was terrible, right?
right. Yeah. And like we've talked about this probably in podcasts before. I know we've talked about it, you know, offline and stuff. The closest thing we've gotten to modern day Highlander type thing was uh was it on Netflix? Yeah, it was a Netflix movie from a comic book called The Old Guard, starring Charlie Theron.
Right.
And they were immortal characters, and they dealt with them being immortal or however long and dealing with immortality in the modern day. And they did some very interesting things in that movie. Some, and it just made me go, okay, this makes me want this, but with Highlander
Mm-hmm.
lore.
Yeah.
And thinking about it that way, I'm like, oh, if they can pull it off, it'll be super interesting and cool.
And also from just a visual audio kind of filmmaking standpoint, like getting somebody like Chad Stahelski, who has a background in stunt work and in action films and modern day
Yeah.
action cinema,
Mm-hmm.
it's very akin to what happened. Like, so the Highlander movie in 1986 was very much lightning in a bottle, right? It was a
Right.
script that was written by a college grad, got sold. The producers pick it up. They get a
Mm-hmm.
young director who had done one feature film out of Australia. Russell Mulcahy had done, I think, Razorback, but he was mostly
Right.
known for his music videos. But he brought
Mm-hmm.
that mentality and that style to action movies in the 80s. So it wasn't, he was bringing a totally different thing from, because action movies in the 80s were Stallone, were Schwarzenegger, were that type of movie, right? And
Mm-hmm.
Highlander looked and sounded and felt so different from those.
Right.
And it brought the fantasy element into it, and it also had just the visual style that he went through. Mulcahy had a great eye for all that kind of stuff. And then
Mm-hmm.
getting Queen, right? Like, you get
Right.
Queen on your soundtrack, and that takes you a long way. So
Right.
it was this lightning in a bottle thing, and the series did a decent job of picking up from that and expanding on the lore and giving us
Mm-hmm.
more.
They did an incredibly smart thing of picking up on more of the grounded lore, immortals in this world now, and
Mm-hmm.
not trying to go too fantastical like they did with the movies.
Yeah.
And they did incredibly well. And something about, you could say, well, the way of making a television show helps to keep them grounded. And I think that worked for the benefit of the story because it did keep them grounded,
Yeah.
but it also was like, yeah, we don't need to be this huge sci-fi fantasy up there kind of thing. Like Highlander does not need to be Star Wars to be excellent.
No, it
You
doesn't.
know,
The fantasy element
it's
should be there, but
right.
I agree in that the restrictions and the limitations of television at the time, especially in budgets, meant
Mm-hmm.
that you had to keep things smaller. And they could get a
Right.
little bit big, but not as big, and
Mm-hmm.
didn't feel the need to, right? That was,
Mm-hmm.
I think, one of the things with the movies was it felt like you always had to have movies when you're making your sequels, you got to up the stakes, right? They got to get bigger. They got to
Right.
get stronger, all that kind of stuff. And that's hard to do over and over and over. A series
Mm-hmm.
can, and especially a syndicated series, the way that Highlander was, where it's not lost, where it's telling one long story.
Mm-hmm.
It's pages out of the book. We get a
Yeah.
chapter with Duncan, and then we skip ahead a few weeks or a couple of months or whatever it is, and we pick up,
Mm-hmm.
and maybe some things have happened in between that, and it's a different type of storytelling that I think helped keep it grounded and let us to spend more time with the character and learn who the character is, and that's what drove it.
Right.
Because ultimately, that's what's going to
Mm-hmm.
drive your thing, and
Mm-hmm.
so the respect that somebody like Cavill will bring to things and Stahelski will bring to stuff as a
Mm-hmm.
fan and as people who like
Right.
the franchise is what gives me the hope of it, because
Yeah.
they're not just
And
going to make a thing to say, oh, look, we made a Highlander movie. Like, they want to do it the way that they would want to see it done.
well, and one more praise to Stahelski is the way that he has created and nurtured the John Wick series. If you haven't watched those movies, there is incredibly deep lore
Mm-hmm.
with that franchise. Like it's
Absolutely.
incredibly action oriented. It's about a bunch of assassins, but the lore that they've made with that is what I think has made that series so freaking interesting to people and gives me so much hope of what he can potentially do with Highlander,
Mm-hmm.
even in a movie franchise. So,
I mean, world building is a big thing, right? World
mhm,
building is important. You want to have interesting characters in an interesting world, and the plot can be, as I've said many, many times, people are probably tired of me saying this, the plot can be simple. But if your characters are more
right.
interesting and complex, and the world they inhabit is interesting, which is
Hmm.
John Wick is the prime example of that. The John Wick movies are basically, you killed my dog, I'm gonna take you out, and it's that, and then it's just sort of recycling this of like, this guy wanted to get out of this business and
Hmm.
he couldn't, so he's going to do the only thing he knows how to do, which is kill them all and go on these rampages. The plots are not complex in any of those movies,
No,
but the
but they're
world
handled
is.
very well.
Yes. And so bringing that to the table with something like this, which has a bunch of lore and people that are respectful of that lore, because I know they'll work the Watchers into
Hmm.
this. I know they're going to work, um, that angle, and whomever the villain ends up being, if they do try to somewhat retread the first story with a Kurgan, or if they go a different route,
Hmm.
there's all sorts of stuff you could do. Like, and so it,
Yeah,
it does give me some hope. It really does.
yeah. I'm hoping it's a just full reboot. Even if it's even if Cavill is Connor McLeod, I hope it's full reboot. Like let's completely reimagine it. I'm okay if he's not Connor, if he's different and he's still McLeod. I'm okay if the guy is not exactly the Kurgan, but he's the well, wink, wink, nudge, nudge. He's the Kurgan kind of
Sure.
thing.
I mean, look at what they did with the first episode of Highlander. It was basically Slan Quince was the Kurgan light,
Yeah.
right? He was the TV version of
Hmm.
the Kurgan, um, and that was the way to do it. It's sort of okay. The latest trilogy of Star Wars movies are very polarizing and very divisive. I understand that,
Hmm.
but
Sure.
Force Awakens, what made that work at the time, whether or not you still like that movie or anything, it was the Star Wars movie that needed to happen in order for the films, for fans to say, okay, they can do a Star Wars movie again. Because it wasn't the
Right.
prequels. It was
Hmm.
effectively the first Star Wars movie. It's kind of what J.J. Abrams does a lot.
Right.
Um, but it's what needed to happen. I'm not saying you do that, but that
Right.
is the mentality you need to have, which is like, we need to make the Highlander movie that is respectful to the source material, but is its own thing. So take the ideas of what The Force Awakens wanted to do, which is kind of prove, look, we can make a good Star Wars movie,
Hmm. Sure.
and take that to another level of, we can make a good Highlander movie again. We can make something that's going to make you remember and feel like you did watching that first Highlander movie, but we can also modernize it, update it, and expand on it. and incorporate
Right.
more things that we have learned over the years, that we have done. You know, the other immortals, the fact that like the feeling of pre-immortals, the fact that they can tell who's going to
Mm-hmm.
become immortal, was
Right.
something. There's a lot of stuff that the series brought into the lore that got incorporated
Yeah.
back into the movies. Um, so, and like I said, don't go the route of the source and set it in a near future. Don't do that.
Yeah.
Please don't.
Nah.
Like, let it be a
No.
modern-ish setting. It doesn't have to
Yeah.
be, because again, it's not our world. It's a version of our world. Um,
Right.
and there's a whole lot from that you can do, and it's what
Mm-hmm.
makes this franchise always interesting to me, and why I love the series so much was this idea that they have to fight for the one and get the prize, but that almost should just be a MacGuffin. The idea of the
Right.
gathering is cool on paper, and maybe and it's something that drives the immortals, but there's always new immortals popping up.
Mm-hmm.
And
Right.
so even when they think there's the gathering, it isn't, and then we just figure out how to integrate that. Um,
Mm-hmm. That's one of those things that like, okay, that needs to be your end game for however multiple movies this is.
mhm.
End with figuring that out and giving us some kind of reason for it or origin for it, even if it's something that's like, oh, that's how this started. Well, that's not cool, kind of thing, you know?
Yeah, or even like a misinterpretation over the centuries.
Or is that how they start the first movie and just reboot Highlander that way? Like they figure out where this started from and they're like, well, that's crap.
I
That's
mean,
not no. And the other movies are like dealing with that kind of fallout of, whoever Henry Cavill's McLeod or whatever, figuring that out and then going, living the rest of the Highlander franchise of no, no, no. Things are different now.
yeah, I
Things are
mean,
different, and do it that way.
because I know there's the fan theory that like Highlander 2 was. I think I mentioned this when we did the Endgame review. The fan theory was that Highlander happened, but Connor didn't win the prize because there wasn't
Mm-hmm.
what he thought he did, just because of how powerful the Kurgan was and the quickening was so powerful,
Right.
but it wasn't actually. We know that because
Mm-hmm.
obviously Duncan's still alive in the canon. Um,
Sure.
and then the fan theory goes that Highlander 2 was actually a fever dream that Connor had while he was in the sanctuary.
Yeah,
And that
I'm
I,
good with
I
that.
kind of like, because that movie is just so out there with the whole whichever version of it you watch is pretty bonkers and
Right.
out there. I gotta say though, like Highlander 2 is not good, but it's still kind of watchable. Like it really is. The first four movies are a real good movie, and three fine movies,
Mm-hmm.
and then the fifth one.
Right.
But
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
anytime you've got a series that goes for as long as this does, in the era that it was happening too, I think is a big part of it, right? Because
Mm-hmm.
franchises try to think of some franchises from that era that really branched out beyond like one entity. I mean, I'm not going to count James Bond or Star Trek, um, because those predated, and James Bond starts in the 60s and
Mm-hmm.
continues on. Okay. But that was sort of we've got a bunch of novels we can build off of.
Mm-hmm.
Highlander is somewhat unique in that it was one idea, it was one movie that was really,
Mm-hmm.
a good parallel to the Highlander franchise is the Terminator franchise.
Yeah.
Because think of that first Terminator movie. That was a self-contained story.
Mm-hmm. Or
There
so
never
you thought.
Yeah, but there never needed to be a sequel to that. There was, because it was popular
Mm-hmm.
enough and Cameron wanted to do something, but there
Right.
wasn't it wasn't made with the idea of building a franchise. Um,
Right.
and Highlander was not made with the idea of building a franchise around it. That just wasn't the mentality back
Mm-hmm.
then. Lord of
No,
the
but there
Rings
was a
kind of changed
mentality
all
to
that.
make sequels. There was a mentality to make sequels, which is what Highlander did to try to make a franchise.
Yeah,
Just because that's how they tried to tie it together, because they wanted to keep the lore and
but when they were making that first movie, I would put down hard money that they never had any thought or intention of making another Highlander movie. That it was, we were making this one
sure.
movie, it's going to end, and then that'll be it. And the
Mm-hmm.
sequel idea came about after it did so well, and then
Right.
they decided to do another one. But if it
Yeah,
were
and see, that's
something,
what
oh, go ahead.
I was going to say. That's where my parallel is. What feels like the Lethal Weapon series. Like that first movie was great, didn't need a sequel, and then they started making more
Yeah,
and fitted into it better
sure.
than they did Highlander, but still like same kind of era and mentality. And I
Yeah,
think with Highlander now, this is one of those franchises where they did not have the technology to do what they really wanted to do back then and do it well.
that's true.
So they did it the best they could. Now we've got the technology to do it. Like they talked about with the Superman movies. Like until the Brandon Routh one, like they weren't too sure they could pull it off well with CG stuff. Once the
Right.
Matrix came out and they were like Neo flew at the end of the first movie, you're like, ooh, does that mean we could actually do a Superman movie? And they were like, I think we can. And they tried. And up until now, when you've got the Avengers, the Man of Steel, and the Justice League, and all that stuff, like we're at the point where we're nitpicky about the CGI and stuff,
Hmm.
but we're nitpicky about it because it's so dang good for these big movies.
Yeah.
So that's not something that will hold them back at all necessarily.
I just think, too, like, if the first Highlander movie was made in 2006 instead of 1986, right?
Mm-hmm.
It would have been made with an eye towards continuing it after the fact from the
Oh, sure.
beginning. Like the concept of it would have been, all right, we've
Mm-hmm.
got this, but also what more could we do with it? Whereas in 1986, it was, we've got this, we're going to make this. And then afterwards, they're like, wow, that was really popular. We need to do more of that because we could make more money with it.
Right. Mm-hmm.
And that's
Which
where it
is
gets
what they're
tough.
thinking about the reboot now too. Like they
Sure.
definitely have this in mind as a series. And again, with Chad Stahelski involved, somebody who has crafted and fostered an incredible movie series in John Wick, again, gets me excited for the potential for the first movie and what could come after that.
Yeah. Because what will happen is it will be made with the idea that there can be more done with it without it having to be sequel bait either.
Right.
Like I don't feel like they'll hold stuff back, but they'll also leave it open for more. Just because it's
Sure.
just the mentality of thinking about that from the beginning. It sort
Yeah.
of mirrors kind of what we were saying with Highlander the Raven, which is they didn't know what they wanted to do. They just were throwing
Mm-hmm.
stuff against the wall to see what sticks and then go from there instead of having a fully fleshed out plan from the beginning.
Right.
That makes a difference. And that's where
Mm-hmm.
I keep my optimism because Stahelski will think that way. Henry Cavill will think that way. And
Yeah.
I think, too, it's no longer the same producers. Like, nothing. Panzer Davis kept that series going for quite some time. But I
Mm-hmm.
do think that at some point they kind of lost their way a little bit from
Yeah.
some of the interviews that I've heard over the years.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of make me think that. So it's it is what it is. But I mean,
Yeah.
look, at the end of the day, we love Highlander. You and I both do.
Yeah, we do.
It's fun,
For sure.
and regardless of what we think of the Raven, it was. I would say at least half the season was perfectly watchable.
Sure.
I'm not upset that we sat through 22 episodes of it. It could have been half that, and we would have been fine. But
Yeah.
um, I've seen worse. I will say that.
Yeah, for sure. But again, on this side of it, yeah, definitely glad we pushed through and watched the whole series, because the last half of the series definitely shone brighter than the first half, and
For
really
sure.
that's when they found their footing as, oh wait, we're a Highlander show. Let's be a Highlander show. And kind of they went with that and it worked. And yes, the last episode was a fizzle, but it could have been, again, it could have been worse.
Hmm.
Wasn't the worst thing they've done in the whole series. But it was just a bit of a stumble at the end.
Yeah. But that's Highlander in a nutshell, kind of.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, some good, some bad, ups and downs. When it's good, it's real good, and when it's bad, it can be pretty rough. But we love it anyway, warts and all. I think too, like obviously having Amanda be basically the only character, because they didn't even bring in, like, Joe shows up for 2 episodes. They needed more of that. They needed more characters to tie us back to the last series, as well as expand. That's the thing that they needed to do, and just wasn't done. So like it would have been great to have Maurice in like 1 episode, just shows up somewhere and knows Amanda, right?
Sure.
And they
he
can have
does, like,
yeah,
he met and knew Amanda while Duncan was in Paris, like,
yeah. So you could have like this one little moment like that, and that gives you a little fan service, but it also ties the shows together. It works. But that's Highlander. And look, dude, we've done 100+ episodes of this show. So what? 119 episodes of the series, 22 of this, plus 5 movies.
Yep.
We've been talking Highlander for a while now.
We have been,
and we're out of content. We got no more Highlander.
Yeah, we can only stretch this so far.
Yeah. The hope was maybe we could stretch it out till the new movie got made, but
right.
Yeah, it's still in pre-production right now. However, we're not done talking.
No.
So if you listen to this show and you don't know already, Audie and I are part of a show called Those Were the Days, which is classic television of the Highlander era and earlier. And we're still doing that. When we say
classic, we're saying 2000 and before.
Yep.
And we mean before. Like, we've covered lots of stuff going back.
Oh, yeah. We've gone all the way back to the 50s and 60s. I think I Love Lucy was late 40s, or was that 50s? I don't remember.
I don't remember either, but still.
But we do that with our friends Steven Adams and Amy Frost. So you can check that out. There's links to that at tvstravis.com and all over the place. You can follow us on social media, and you'll find out about all that. Audie and I are going to take a little time off, regroup, spend some time with family and friends over the summer, and reconvene, talk about, hash out some ideas. We're bringing something new for everyone. What that is yet, we're not 100% sure, but we're going to have something fun for you. So keep an eye on the socials. We'll let you know. I'm TV's Travis on all the social networks, whatever one it is. And also at tvstravis.com. Audie, you're on all the socials too, aren't you?
Yeah, you can find me at the Audie Norman. So we'll definitely be sharing with you guys at some point what we're going to do. And we are going, this isn't one of those, hey, we're going to do something and it never happens. No, we're going to figure out something.
We are. And, honestly, if you've got ideas of something you want to hear us talk about, send them our way. We're not above taking some suggestions and seeing what sounds good. So we're definitely, but we are definitely coming back. We're not going to be gone that long, but it'll be a little bit. So in the meantime, check out Those Were the Days. This will be probably the final episode, although I'm working on a little something special that might be happening in a couple of months. So if it does, obviously, like I said, keep an eye on things. And if it does end up happening, I'll be posting it in this feed. So hang on to the feed if you're a fan. And who knows, if the Highlander reboot comes out, maybe we'll do one special episode and throw it on here. Either way, but
I'm sure we'll do something whenever that movie comes out. We'll have to do a Let's Watch Highlander review of it for sure.
for sure. But this has been a fun journey. It's been great
It really
revisiting
has.
this series. And not
It's
only
funny. I've been listening. I've been re-listening to the soundtrack stuff and like Who Wants to Live Forever, Princess of the Universe, and it just makes me want to rewatch the series again.
right. I the other day I came across the scene from Revelation 6:8 with Duncan and Mythos when Mythos is leaving and they have their confrontation next to the Jimmy.
Mm-hmm.
And oh god, it's so good. Like that's such a great
Yeah.
scene. Just the acting the two of them did there, and the character work.
Mm-hmm.
Loved it. Same thing. I was like, I just want to go back and watch Highlander episodes. So,
Yeah.
and thank you from both of us for listening to us ramble on about this show for the last almost 4 years now.
Yeah. Absolutely.
We love it and appreciate you guys so much. This has been just a ton of fun for us, and I'm looking forward to whatever comes next for the two of us talking about a show. We've got some ideas already going on, but we're gonna hammer those out, and I can't wait for you to listen to it. So hopefully you'll come check us out.
Yeah.
And until then, gentle listeners, remember that there can be only one great Highlander podcast.
Yep.
The best part about yup to end it is that's how you ended the first episode. I'm almost positive that was how that first one went. I'm almost positive it was I ended with a there can be only one something, and there was a pause and then a yup. So that's like a perfect bookend.
Cheers to that.
Well done.
Man.
God, we started this in 2020?
Something like that.
Let me look, actually. I can find out.
Mm-hmm. I still love to. What was it? Were we in the chat for like TMS or something? Or was it a Two Dorks chat? I just remember us both being in the chat, and Highlander got mentioned, and we both were just like,
I think it was.
That. Oh, you tell me, I'm there.
I think it was Horseshoes and Hand Grenades.
Right.
I'm pretty sure it was. So, first of all, published episodes right now sits at 142.
Good Lord.
And there's still a few I have to finish up and get posted. So, damn. I mean, most podcasts don't make it past episode 10. We did 142 and counting. And our first episode was June 25th, 2020. Just shy of 4 years.
There you go.
Crazy. Crazy to think.
Mm-hmm.
Part of me wants to go back and listen to that, and part of me is like, I don't want to hear what we sounded like 4 years ago at all. Yeah. I just want to say it's there and move on.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I'm excited for what we're going to do. I can't wait for people to give us some ideas and find some good stuff to do.
Sure.
And
I'm interested to see if people have ideas for us and want us to talk about something in particular, because that would be interesting to see. Like, oh, you think we could do good with that? Okay.
Yep. You can't hear her, but she is snoring so loud.
Yeah.
She's so funny. All right. Well, stream. Thank you to those of you who came by tonight. We appreciate that. Yeah. You guys are great.
As always.
And we won't be back next week. I might be, though. Nah. We'll see what's going on with my Thursday. I may fill the Thursday evenings with some stuff just to keep a cadence going.
Yeah. There you go.
Especially as and then as we figure out what we're going to do, there may or may not be a live stream component to it. We haven't decided that yet. But there will be a new show. So there is that. Yeah. And then I'll be in Scotland in about 8 weeks, I think I figured.
Dang.
It's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Yep. End of 8 weeks from Saturday. I take off for
Holy
Skull.
cats.
It's nuts. It's nuts.
Yeah, but that's going to be a fun trip.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. I can't wait. All right, Stream. Well, thank you, Amy, for hanging out with us, and whomever else happened to be in there. And until next time, remember there can be only one.
Yup.